Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity webinar series where we focus in on workplace mental health. As you all know very well by now, there's a Q&A box at the top of your screen. You can submit questions to it anytime. We'll try to get through as many as we can at the end of the presentation. And if you haven't already, please make sure you sign up for emails on our michigan.gov/workplace mental health page. That includes all the recordings, and including part one of this series, slides, reports, links, references, you name it, that's where we're putting everything. And as we continue to focus on those three pillars, being those things that are happening in the workplace, things that are affecting the workplace, so all of those things that happen to us outside of work and we bring with us, and individual behavioral health supports, we definitely try to make sure that we're hitting on all those pillars with the different content that we bring you, and you can find those on that website as well. And we're full steam ahead on our what can we do about it phase of our work with these three-part series. And we're so excited about the information we've been able to bring you so far and the information we're going to continue to build to help us change our workplaces in a positive way. So today is part two of our three-part series where we're focusing in on building respectful and inclusive organizations. And it's interesting because our workplaces bring together a broad and diverse group of people with different lived experiences, different cultures, different needs, and building great workplaces really means that we have to ensure that we have that culture of respect. And we're joined again today by our great friend and collaborator, Dr. Michelle Kaminski from Michigan State University, to examine how we should react or respond should we see this occurring in our workplace. Michelle has been a great friend and contributor to all of our work since the beginning, and we're just so thankful that she continues to provide her expertise to everything that we're doing. So over to you, Dr. Kaminski.
Thank you, Sean. I'm really happy to be here. And I've had the pleasure of doing a couple of these sessions with you before, some a year ago, one just a month ago. And I like to start out by reminding people that I know my goals, and I believe the goals of Leo also, are that we all want a healthy workplace. We think everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect on the job, and that work shouldn't be painful. It shouldn't harm you. You shouldn't be injured. You shouldn't get sick because of your work. You shouldn't be abused because of your job. So we are very much in favor of healthy workplaces, and we're talking about what we can do to make that happen. So this is the second of three webinars we're doing on this topic of building respectful and inclusive organizations. Last time we talked about mistreatment at work in its various forms. And so we talked about behaviors that either cause harm to others or have the potential to cause harm to others. And they can be either more or less intense. They can be intentional or unintentional. They can be perceived as intentional, whether they are or not. They can be based on social identities or not. So there's a big range of stuff out there. And we talked about one potential approach to responding to it if you're the target of that kind of mistreatment, which was PALS, which is pause, ask, listen, and then speak. But today we're going to talk about what if you're not the target of it? What if you're the witness? Now that PALS thing I just talked about, that might apply in some situations, and so you should still keep that tool in your toolkit. But I'm going to talk about something today that we call bystander intervention. And let me start by telling you a story about something that happened to me a long, long time ago. It was several employers ago on my first job out of graduate school. And a thing you kind of need to understand about the place I was working, it was like a small startup, nonprofit kind of thing. And our mission was helping other organizations make sure that they included employees in decision making. So we all came to our work with the belief that, yes, management makes decisions, but employees at all levels have a huge amount of knowledge, and to shut them out of decision making was a bad thing. It was bad for them, and it was bad for the organization because you were missing out on all kinds of knowledge. So knowing that that is the core thing about our organization is kind of important to this story. So I'm sitting in my office, and one of the secretaries, Darlene, comes into my office and says, "Oh, Michelle, would you proofread this letter for me?" And I thought this was a little weird because she wasn't my secretary. She was the boss's secretary, and it wasn't my letter. And she doesn't ever ask me to proofread anything for her. So I'm thinking this is a little weird. I'm like, "Darlene, we've got this big meeting in 10 minutes. You know, that's Brian's letter. Why don't you ask Brian to proofread?" And she goes on. She's not really comfortable. She doesn't want to ask him. She doesn't want to interrupt him because we've got this meeting in 10 minutes. I'm like, yes, I know. And but she keeps really pushing. She starts flattering me. Oh, Michelle, you're so good at this, etc. I'm like, Darlene, I know, I'm sure you did a good job. So it's clear that something else is going on here. It's a little more clear in hindsight. She wanted me to read the content of the letter. She wasn't really asking me to proofread it. And so I read the letter and I just get really angry because what that letter indicated, it was written by the boss, and it indicated that the decision at this super big meeting where we were deciding the future of the next 3 years of this organization, that the decision had already been made. And here we are, we're an organization that believes in employee input, and we're just going into this meeting where we're supposed to make this decision. So I walk into the meeting room and there are like 5 to 10 people there, don't remember exactly. And I'm standing and I've got this letter in my hand. And I was telling Sean a little before we got on, please remember, I was young and foolish at this time. It was my first full-time job out of graduate school. So I have this letter in my hand and my boss is standing like 6 feet away from me. And I say to him, Brian, I did not use pals. I'm like, Brian, I just saw this letter. What's going on? You know, this meeting is a total sham. Like, no, the other thing is I'm not known for my subtlety either. So again, young and foolish, right? But at that moment, this was, you know, you have these moments in your life where time kind of stops. I saw this rage cross his face, absolute fury. And he's looking at me and I'm thinking, oh my God, he's going to hit me. My boss is going to hit me. And I'm just kind of stunned and flabbergasted. I don't know, I don't understand how on earth this can possibly be happening. And the young and foolish part, how can this be happening to me? I work hard, you know, why wouldn't my boss like me? And he doesn't actually, what he does is he lunges at me, and this is when I think this is going to happen, but what he does is he just rips the letter out of my hand. He fortunately did not actually hit me. He just ripped the letter away from me. And I said that there were like somewhere between 5 and 10 other people in the room. And one of them, my friend Melissa, stood up and said, Brian, that is unacceptable. And all the air just deflated out of Brian, and he just sort of hung his head and shuffled over to his spot at the table. And so it was a moment when I really needed help from someone else. My colleague Melissa really stepped up. And the thing that I think is really important about this scenario is, at least as I look at it, is we were a pretty small group, and Melissa was the newest hire. So in some ways, the person who had the most at risk, because she hadn't really proven herself yet. She'd only been there for a few weeks. And also because this was, it didn't exactly get physical, but it was pretty close to that. It was kind of bumping up against that. And Melissa was like one of these super petite women, like they used to say, 100 pounds soaking wet. And she stood up to the boss. She was not the most powerful person there. And the others were all men, by the way, and they did not stand up at all. And in talking with them later, some of them even denied that the whole thing happened. And we'll talk a little about that, what causes that in a minute too. So this was a moment when the bystander who intervened on my behalf really made me feel like I'm not alone, I'm not crazy, that this really is unacceptable and it shouldn't have happened. I, of course, should have been a little better in how I approached it, but still, that doesn't justify my boss's response. So one bystander with just a sentence can make a huge difference. So we're going to talk about when you might want to intervene in a situation. What kinds of things should you take into account? It can be, you know, how do people decide whether or not to intervene in the first place? And then if you decide to intervene, what are some ways you can do that? So here are some common reasons why people don't intervene, even when they know there's something wrong going on. So one of them is this kind of norm we have that it's not my problem, it's not my business, stay in your lane, just kind of don't intervene, this strong social pressure. And that's going to vary depending on the environment, of course. It's going to be stronger with two strangers you see on the street than it is going to be in your own workplace, but it's still going to be there in your workplace. Another reason is that oftentimes people don't know what they could do in this situation. They don't know how to intervene, and we'll talk towards the end of the session about how to do that. The third one, very real in the workplace, especially, but also fear of retaliation. But think about it, some of these concepts are more clear from sort of situations in families and domestic violence. I know police officers will tell you if you are separating a couple that is physically violent, the person you perceive to be the target might often turn on the police officer or the person who's trying to intervene. So they could experience retaliation. And in the workplace, you could experience retaliation in terms of poor assignments or not getting a promotion. I could have been fired. Melissa could have been fired. We did not have a union then, although we did have one a few months after that. And that would have changed the power dynamics. But the fear of retaliation is very real. And if that person's being so aggressive to someone else, will they be that aggressive to you? So that's a real consideration. Another thing is sometimes people think, I just kind of walked in on this. I'm not really sure what's going on. So just to give you a silly counterexample, what if people were kind of repeating a scene they'd seen on some streaming show the night before, for example, just to give you sort of a ridiculous example. There might be something you don't know about the situation and you may misunderstood. And the last reason I want to talk about is what I think the boss's right-hand man, who I talked to about this, about my situation, I talked with him about it afterwards. And there's this, but you can also clearly see this where there are cases of abuse within families or within religious organizations. When someone that you are dependent on, especially if a child is dependent on a caregiver, betrays your trust, or and is abusive, or in the workplace betrays what you feel like the fundamental purpose of that organization is, or some fundamental norm about it, then it's very damaging. And what we call betrayal blindness, it's so bad that it's not like you see it and you decide to ignore it. You really can't even see it. Your brain just won't acknowledge it because the threat to you, to your livelihood, etc., is just so great. So those are many reasons. These are some of the reasons. There are probably others why people choose not to intervene. And then, but on the other side, what are the benefits of intervening? So think about a place where a culture has kind of like a lot of teasing and joking, and some of that's really kind of offensive joking. One thing you can do by intervening is you can break this cycle and you can break these norms and say, that's really not okay, and establish new norms. You can help someone who needs help, and also you can prevent the situation from getting worse because those things can escalate. Now, what about that situation that I just described that what if I just misunderstood and there was nothing going on? Okay, so what happens if that's the case? Well, first of all, nobody got hurt. Your intentions were good, so there's no reason why anybody would be angry at you, and everybody just goes on with their day. It might be that you feel a little awkward or a little foolish, but that's a pretty short-term consequence for something that may have made a big difference in someone's life if the situation weren't different. But this is the important thing, I think. What happens if we don't intervene? The harmful behavior continues. If it's a pattern, it may continue towards other people, may continue towards you, and someone may get hurt, someone may have already been hurt. So those are reasons why we might consider intervening. And then, but people go through this calculation in their minds about whether or not to do something in a situation like this. And it might take them like a second or two, and it's going to take me a little longer to describe it. So first, you have to notice that something is going on, that something's different. And it might be just the raised voices and the language that's being used. It could also be more subtle. It could be just the tone of voice or the body language, but you have to notice that something's different and something's off. And then you have to evaluate it and say, is this a problem or not? And this is where you have to use your judgment. Nobody can give you a set of rules that that will cover all situations. Next is the idea of who takes responsibility. Anyone who's had a Psych 101 class may have heard the phrase diffusion of responsibility. Like if you're in a room with two people and you see smoke and flames, you might say, I'll call 911, you go get the fire alarm. If you're in a room with 100 people, you might say, somebody call 911, somebody go pull the fire alarm. That the more people, the less responsible each person feels. So the thing about intervention is that we have to feel like, yes, it's our responsibility to intervene. And then we have to know what to do, which is what I'm going to talk about next, and then go do it. And as we start talking about what to do next, I want to say this applies to like everything I'm saying today. This requires judgment on your part, and you know what you're comfortable doing, and nobody else can tell you that. And you have to make this judgment based on your comfort with different levels of risk, your own skills at conflict resolution, but also things like your own social identity. How does that interact with the social identities of the other people there? And how is that going to influence how this is going to be seen? You know what's right for you, and only you can make those kinds of decisions. So understanding that I'm going to list these 5 tools, and in any situation, they're just tools that you might think about. In any situation, you have to make judgments about what's going to work best for you. So these 5, we like to have acronyms and other things to help people remember. These are the 5 Ds: delay, document, delegate, distract, and direct. And I've put them on the screen here so they're arrayed. So the ones on the left are a little more passive and maybe a little easier to do. And the ones on the right are far more challenging and demanding. So let's talk about each one for just a minute. The first one is to delay. And so this isn't actually intervening in the moment. Instead, it's going after the fact to the person who was the target and saying, gee, what happened there was kind of messed up. Are you okay? Is there anything how can I help? And can you bring resources for them? Can you offer to go to HR? What can you do? So it's following up after the fact. The next one is documenting it. And so it's possible that if you're there, you might be able to take notes. You might be able to record it with your phone. If you put a phone in someone's face, they might see that as kind of aggressive, and they might, it's possible they could have turned and start attacking you, or it's possible that if they know what they're doing is wrong, that'll make them back down. And maybe you can videotape from a distance, et cetera, or use your phone to record from a distance, et cetera. But if you do document, a thing to do is to talk to the target afterwards and say, hey, I took notes, or hey, I recorded that. What do you want me to do with that documentation? And probably at a minimum, you should give it to whoever the target was. The next thing on the list is to delegate. And that means that you are, this has to happen very quickly though, but basically find somebody else to help. You know that they need help. You're not really sure you can do it yourself. So find somebody else who's nearby and who you think can go in with you. And so that might be somebody who's a trusted colleague, or maybe who has more sort of status, or it may just be anybody else who's there because you don't want to go in alone. But the thing is, it has to be done quickly, because a lot of these things, they last for a relatively short period of time. So I wouldn't like go the next building over and then come back and expect the situation to still be where it was. The fourth, so all of these, the first 2, delay and document, are really, you're not really getting directly involved. Delegate, you're trying to find somebody else to get involved, and maybe you'll go in with them. Distract and direct, you get more directly involved. Distracting, the idea here is you're just trying to go in there and interrupt. So you just want to sort of derail the harasser from whatever it is they're saying, and get them to stop, and hope that you're breaking that pattern and they'll pull back from it. So there are a lot of different ways to do this, and you could be imaginative about it. But let's say one good way to do it is to, my colleague Tina's on the call, so I'm going to use Tina as an example. So I could, if someone were doing, being aggressive towards Tina, I could go in there and say, hey, Tina, that was a really great class you taught earlier this morning. Can I talk with you some more about that? And so there's a couple things, like if you put a positive spotlight on the target, that will really set the perpetrator, the aggressor, back on their heels some, because they're not thinking about the target as somebody who's good and skilled and competent. So you could put positive attention on them. You could ask them things like, hey, Tina, what time is that meeting we have this afternoon? And you could ask that even if there's no meeting this afternoon, or there is, and you know darn well what time it is. You're just trying to break it. They also, another thing people recommend sometimes is go in there and like drop something or spill a bottle of water or something like that, that forces people to stop what they're doing and pay attention to that physical object you dropped or spilled. The idea is just do something that is not a direct challenge to the aggressor, but just interrupts. The last one, direct, is what my friend Melissa did. And that is the direct confrontation, to go in there and say, hey, this is not okay. Melissa said directly, Brian, that is not acceptable. And a key thing, couple key things to keep in mind, you want to be talking about the behavior. You don't want to go in there saying, Brian, you're an effing jerk. You want to say that behavior is not acceptable. So it's also not, this is not for everyone. If you're not comfortable with this, don't do this. This is about, because this is directly confrontational, and you are potentially putting yourself in the other person's, making yourself a target down the road. But as I said, in this case, Brian just backed down. So some general tips about this is that it's a good idea to the extent possible, to remain calm. Don't raise your voice. You do not want to escalate the situation. You want to de-escalate it. You don't want to resolve the situation. You don't want to stand there and say, I know Tina is a fabulous instructor and she would do this, that, and the other thing. And I know that she's great. So what you're saying is just not true. You're being a jerk. That's the point. Is not, you're not there to argue the point. You're there to just stop the aggression. And again, you want to criticize the person or the behavior, not the person. And as I said earlier, that all of this is situational, and all of this requires you to make a judgment about what you are comfortable with. So to wrap up, why might someone choose to intervene in a situation like this? One is to stop the behavior and the immediate behavior. And if it's a pattern of behavior, you can stop the cycle, hopefully going forward, and just to help other people. You absolutely want to consider your own safety and the safety of the target. For example, if the aggressor had a weapon, I'm calling the police. I'm not going in there. So you have to make these kinds of judgments, and you absolutely have the right to consider your own safety. And also consider how your social identity interacts. And again, your goal is to de-escalate. And then the 5 Ds that we talked about: delay, document, delegate, distract, or direct. And delaying and document are a little easier to do for people who are uncomfortable with conflict. Delegate's kind of in the middle. Distract is more forward and engaged, but it's not focused on the topic. It's just changing the subject. And direct conflict is perhaps the most difficult one to do, and only those who are comfortable should really do that. So we said at the beginning that this is the second in a 3-part series. And we talked about what to do here. Last week, we talked about what mistreatment is and how to respond if you're the target. And now we're talking about how to respond if someone, what to do if someone else is the target. And my colleague Tina Riley in September is going to be talking about what happens when something is reported to HR or higher ups, and how do people conduct a respectful and effective workplace. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it back over to Sean.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think for those, if you want to refresh on part 1 and kind of what mistreatment looks like, I think we would say, there are difficult conversations at work. We will be critiqued for our work. Like there are certain things that are going to occur. I think we're talking about more, right? More than that. We shouldn't be getting yelled at. I mean, there's like certain things that shouldn't be happening, right? That we're trying to work through. We did get a couple of questions. Probably one I would imagine that you get quite frequently in all of your work, Dr. Kaminski, is how do you address mistreatment at work if you don't have an HR department and the person that is your HR is the person that's behaving incorrectly?
Right. Yeah.
And a follow-up to that, an additional question was, would the same method apply with an individual who is in a position of authority, but is not direct? So, I mean, it's kind of like the question, you can take them individually, but it's sort of like, what do I do if it's the person above me? You know, how do I manage that?
Right. So, yeah, we get these questions a lot. And I said at the beginning early, this you have to use your judgment. And the thing for what to do when higher ups are the people who are misbehaving, you don't want to go up against them alone. Basically, you want to get either a group of other employees, or if you can find sympathetic people who are at their level or above, who can say this is not okay. It's best if like you can get their boss to say it's not okay, although going around them to their boss has its own problems. But if you can get their peers to start tamping down that behavior on their part, that's really great. It's not always possible. I have seen situations, there's a great example from nursing where there was a physician who was really abusive of a lot of the nurses on a regular basis, and they just basically banded together. They set a particular code for when this was happening again to another nurse, and they all, when they put that code out, then like 10 nurses would come and stand around this boss in a circle. So really some kind of collective action with your peers, or some kind of intervention if you have support from the bosses or person of authority's peers, which isn't always the case. Either way, it's not easy. And either way, a key thing is, don't go saying, "Oh, Brian, you idiot." Just say that particular behavior is not okay.
Yeah, and workplaces, I imagine, can be pretty complicated. I think one of the questions, sort of back to how do you intervene without escalating? So you gave a great example of sort of, if you're comfortable, interjecting yourself, maybe talking about a different situation. Does that work all the time? I mean, is like, what are other recommends? Like, if that's not working, should I just back away? Like, what should you do?
Well, in my experience, when somebody else comes in and changes the topic, like you could say, "Hey, did you see that Tigers game last night? They swept the Astros, and this puts them in a good position for the postseason." Whatever. When people come in and change the topic, it takes the wind out of the sails of the aggressor really a lot of the time. You can never say all the time, right? But it's that distracting thing is really pretty, I think, really pretty effective a lot of the time. And especially the longer you keep that interruption going, the less likely the aggressor is to return to that particular behavior. And the other thing you can do, I was using Tina as an example. What if I said, "Hey, Tina, can you come? I'm having trouble with this thing on my laptop, on my computer. Can you come look at something with me? This thing just doesn't look right." You can try and take them out of the situation.
Yeah.
So I find the distracting thing pretty
effective. Yeah. We got a follow-up question right away on the nurses. Did that change the behavior?
Yes, it took several times, but yes.
Okay.
He got totally flummoxed. He didn't know what the heck was going on, and eventually he figured it out.
Yeah, and we got a question on the documenting and using your phone for recording. So I don't expect you to give legal advice, but the person asked, like, everybody has to agree to that, right? And I think I'll kind of handle that one if it's okay, sort of. If you're recording on your phone, like, we're not talking about you're taking this to the Supreme Court, right? It's really like you're documenting what's happening in your workplace. So there are certain laws around recordings and what they could be used for, but those are really around the courts. It's not really about a workplace type situation. Do you have any advice on how folks handle a situation when a subordinate is actually the aggressor toward a manager? I know we talked about workplace bullying and harassment a long time ago now on one of our webinars, so you can find it on our website. But you did say it's not as common, but there are times when it's the other way around. Any
Right.
thoughts? Yeah.
Sure. Well, the thing about this is the manager has the tools at their disposal. They say, they get to say, Brian, that is, that's not how we do things here. And they get to say that a number of times. And if that person continues to bully them, they can give them a bad performance review and they can put them on a performance improvement plan. They can potentially discipline them. That's what we have all those tools for. And those tools are great for when a supervisor needs to address the behavior of a subordinate. Those tools already exist. People are reluctant to use them though. And so that's a frustrating thing. But the idea of, I'm a union side person and we don't like it when employees get disciplined, but sometimes discipline is called for. And the idea of progressive discipline is you want to correct the behavior. You want to give the employee a chance to get better. So if they do something once, they get a small penalty. If they do it a second time, they get a little bigger penalty. If they do it a third time, they get a bigger penalty. And eventually, if you do it enough, you lose your job. And I think that the manager, the supervisor, is really in a good position to use those tools. But what too many of them do is they just let it go. And then when you let it go and you suddenly say, well, you've been doing that for 10 years and, now we're going to put an end to it. That is very difficult. And then the employee has a right to say, but this has been okay for 20 years or 10 years, whatever I said. Yeah. So the supervisor needs to set the standard and set it early on. And, when those small transgressions happen the first go around, don't let them slide. Don't let them pass. Don't give people a big penalty, but don't reward them. Don't ignore them. Respond in kind. If it's a small thing, just, I wouldn't have said it that way or something like that. And then if the subordinate keeps escalating, then the supervisor has the tools to escalate the penalty.
Gotcha. Well, that's about our time for today. Thank you so much for the part 2 of this series. We're looking forward to next month where we wrap this up with this sort of, it's happened, we know it's happening, how do we investigate it, and what do we do? Kind of where do we go with that? So we're really excited to kind of wrap up this 3-parter. Great information so far, and thank you so much all for joining us today. Again, you can find all of this on our website. This one will be up there in a couple of days, and we do email it out again too. So we look forward to seeing you in September for the 3rd part of this series.
Thanks, Sean.